Hello all! Welcome to the new lesson segment where we will explore a new software, the Autodesk 3D Studio Max. 3ds Max is best known for its modeling and rendering tools. Its strengths come into play in architecture, manufacturing, game development, motion graphics, industrial design, and of course, interior design. There are many features and techniques to master, from sculpting, texturing, to lighting and rendering. Learning how to get around the 3D Studio Max user interface and producing quality presentation materials will be the milestone of this module moving forward. We need to know how to model different objects using splines, polylines, polygons, subdivision surfaces, and so on. Learning how to construct, add cameras, adding lightings to scenes, and animating it using keyframes. Let's start our tutorial now. Let's take a general look at the user interface. Okay, typically this will be what you will see when you first started up the program. Down here, there will be a little bit of introduction on the user interface itself that you can click on. Like for example, this area here in the viewport is where we will control the camera and the viewport displays. And on the left here, where this bar would be, will be the Scene Explorer, and this is where you can sign in at near the top right hand corner at this point. And you can now select a workspace as well. We will talk about that later. We'll just leave it default. And one of the most important key areas would be this area down here, which is the command panel. And below here would be this area down here, will be the animation, time configuration, and down at this spot here will be the zoom and navigation tools. And typically, this will be the interface you will be seeing at this point. Before we do anything else though, let's do a little bit of customization first, so that it will help us in terms of efficiency and user friendliness. Let's go to Customize, Preferences. Look under this area here. First of all, the default scene undos. By default, there are 20 levels of undo. That means it allows us to undo for up to 20 steps previously. Okay, for new users, we may want to set it up a little bit higher to, let's say, 30 levels of undo here. And we will not want to use this texture coordinates here. Alright, please take note not to use this real world texture coordinates, because for new users, we would like to show you one method to map the textures first. Okay, and when we do two types all at once, there's a good chance we will confuse you more than sharing with you how to get it to work properly. Then next we move on to Files, the Files tab. Please activate this part here, this portion here called Convert Local File Paths to Relative. This one. This will allow us to adjust and reconnect the texture files when we are importing or merging files done elsewhere. Also, please take note on the auto backup and enable the auto backup here. By default, it says the auto backup will be 3 sets of auto backups. I think we can just leave it as it is for now. The number of backup interval time is set at 5 minutes. You will find that saving the files every 5 minutes itself, it's okay for a start. But when the file becomes complicated and the file becomes quite big and heavy, each time it saves, you will find that the program will stop interacting with you and it almost seems like it is hanging or freezing. So this is the part where you may want to adjust this a little bit for now. I'm pretty happy just having it saving at every 15 minutes interval. So at the very most, when I lose my work, when the program crashes, I lose about 15 minutes worth of work here. Alright? But the thing is, auto backup is pretty important. Yeah. Next part, let's move on to viewports here. So please make sure this portion here on show vertices as dots, this option is on, and I like to just make this one bigger, so I like to have the sizes set at 5 at this point, so that later on the vertex handles and all, I can see it quite clearly down here as well. And when this is done, I will just click OK for now. Next, we're going to move on to customize and units setup. So please make sure by default we are having this as the display units. You see down here, this is the display unit scale. So please make sure we are leaving this at generic units for now, so it doesn't display any mm or meters or feet or inches and so on. We really don't need to be dealing with this at this level. And please also go into now the system unit setup. This system unit setup, we need to make sure it is the system unit scale is set to millimeters. This is so that later on, when we start importing the files done elsewhere, like from SketchUp or from AutoCAD for example, it comes in the correct scale when we imported the drawings in and so on. Because in our local context here, we use metric system, so we are not going to touch on inches too much here. So we're going to work with millimeters. So when we're done, we click OK and OK. Next, you notice that the default user interface color is largely dark, in this dark gray configuration. Over the years, I find that my students will generally fare better if they use another user interface color. And also over the years, I kind of prefer having it in a lighter scheme because I find that it helps my eyesight a lot. Working long hours or over a long period of time using this dark scheme strains my eyes, and I find it incredibly tiring because I have to strain my eyes to see very hard to see whether this command I have selected or not, or I have highlighted or not. So I like to get you to just change it into a lighter scheme for now. So let's go to customize, go to custom defaults switcher, and change the default UI from this scheme under the UI schemes from default UI to AME light, and click set. And then we click OK. So once we're done, we can close the program and restart it. Okay, I have already restarted this, and you now notice that after I'm back again, after I've restarted the program, the user interface is now in a lighter gray, and I find that I can see a whole lot better using this particular user interface here, this way. We will start from taking a look at the menu bar. File, New is where we will create anything from a new file. When we start everything from new. Open is where we will open an existing file, and you have your usual save and save as. And the more frequently used commands here will be import, where we will import drawings from AutoCAD and other sources. We will use merge to merge or to import files created using 3D Studio Max. Edit is where you will find your usual commands for move, rotate and scale. And one of the very useful commands here will be select similar. Select similar command is when you begin to have quite a fair amount of things inside the scene that you need to select quite quickly. Like for example, let me just unhide everything. In this scene here, you'll find that we have a couple of similar items here. So what would happen is, instead of selecting them one by one, we can select one object here and go to Edit and select Similar. You will find that Max would allow us to automatically select things that are similar in this case. It's not always precise and accurate, but it generally helps us with things. Selection itself, there's also quite a fair degree of skill involved in terms of learning how to select. For example, we can click on one object, and when we want to select more things, we can either do a window selection at one time, or we can select one object and hold the Control key, and we keep clicking on the subsequent objects here. This will allow us to add to selection. And to reduce our selection, we can click and hold on to the alternate key to reduce our selection as well, this way. Next, I would like to share with you on how to manage your scene. In our case here, it's very easy to manage this scene when we only have 3 cubes and a teapot. But when the items becomes quite a lot, in terms of tens, hundreds or even thousands, it will be very difficult to model or to work on anything in a scene that complicated. So what's going to happen is, we must learn how to control and manage the scene to only see what we need to work on and hide away other things. This is where the right click menu becomes important to us. Okay, you will realize when we right click, we can see a variety of commands here as well, and depending on whether the objects are selected or not, the menu changes as well. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on these portions here on hiding and unhiding. So what would happen is, for example, if I do not want to see these 2 boxes inside the scene for now, I can select these 2 boxes. First, I can select by holding on to the Control key to add to my selection, and then I can right click to click on this button here called Hide Selection. And in doing this, our scene becomes a lot easier to manage right now, this way. And when we need to see everything all together showing up, we can right click and then unhide all. And once this happens, we can use the shortcut key Z to see everything, or we can use the, let me unhide this again, or we can use the command here, zoom extends all, or in this case, zoom extends selected view to unhide this as well. Let me show you another example here. Zoom extends all selected here. So all views here will be zooming to everything that we can see in the scene here. We go to Tools. Tools is where we can access commands like mirror, array, align, for example. And group is where when the scene becomes more complicated and there is a need for us to organize our files, we will use the group commands quite a fair bit. For example, now, if I would like to group up these 3 similar objects, what I'll do is I can window select these cubes together, and then I can go to group and then group them up. So I can give them a logical name here, let's say cubes, and click OK. So you realize that these cubes will then be grouped up already. Now if we need to further make changes to it thereafter, what can happen is we can do it in two ways. We can first of all either choose to ungroup them and make our editing, or we can use the open option here. Now the difference is when we ungroup them, we obviously will lose the whole grouping altogether. But if we only need to make some changes to it, we should use the open command here. That way we can still make our changes to things, and after we are done with it, we can go to group again and we can close the group. Notice here the grouping is not destroyed and it remains. And we will touch a little bit on the command panels here at this portion down here. The first step will be to create geometries. That's under create. The second one is for modifications, for modify. And the third one is hierarchy, where we would frequently use this tab to affect the pivots only, which I will explain later in the course. Motion relates to animation, and display would allow us to hide things in categories. Like for example, all these are created as a geometry. So if we click on geometry, you notice that all the geometries being created will be hidden away. And lastly, you have utilities here. This is when we become a little bit more advanced in our usage, then we will use this command tabs here. And I want to bring your attention to the lower right hand corner here. This area would allow us to use the zoom command. Like for example, if I were to right click on this viewport here, we can use the zoom command here to zoom in and out. And sometimes when we over zoom or we zoom too much, too inwards already, we can use the zoom extends all to, in a way, refresh the screen by zooming everything to its extent. Like for example, if we zoom in for everything, all the views, we can use this command here, zoom extends, and it will allow us to zoom and see everything all at once. And then here you have your Scene Explorer toolbar, in which it will allow us to do selections simply by clicking on the available items in the scenes. We can also hide them by clicking on the eye icon here and thaw them as necessary. And I want to bring your attention over to this portion here. These are the few very commonly used commands here. Like for example, select and move, where we can select the object or the geometry and we can begin to move them accordingly. Or we can click on the rotate command here, where we can rotate the geometry here. And we can also select and uniform scale objects as well to make it bigger or smaller. The next part here will be looking at the snaps itself. Snaps allows us to draw or model precisely or accurately. We can use the right click button of our mouse to be able to select what we want to snap. By default, grid points are used. you'll notice that when you activate the snaps, and once you select a move command or any command here, once you select a command, it will snap to the grids here. This is in a way useful only for beginners. You'll find that this becomes more of a hindrance than a helpful feature if we keep snapping onto the grid. So what would happen is we will right click and change it from snapping to grid points to, let's say, endpoints. Once we have that activated, you'll find that we are now able to snap to the endpoints of an object or a geometry, and then we can use that to snap accurately to certain objects here. Next, I want to touch on the part on coordinates, which you can see down at this point here. Coordinates allow us to know where things are, and also we can use it effectively to help us position things or draw accurately. So you notice that this does not light up, or this does not show up when we do not have anything selected. But when we have clicked on something, you will find that the coordinates will now begin to show up. So for example, if I were to select the group of boxes here, you now find that there will be X 0 units, Y 1500 units, and Z 500 units. So where exactly is this actually referring to? It is actually referring to, let me activate the grids. It is actually referring to the what we call the gizmo down here at this point. Do you notice that there is a little green and yellow arrow here? And it's also showing up in a 3D view here, where you will now see the X, Y, and Z coordinates as well. And when we toggle or move the slider, you will find that it begins to move along the Z axis here. Or let me try to use the X axis here, and you find that when we move the slider, it will begin to move the selected objects as well. Now, we want to remember that this is actually relative to the gizmo here. You can see the gizmo will appear in all the viewports down here as well. And by using the move command as well, with the move command activated here, we can also right click on the command to call out what we call the move transform type in. So if you notice here and here, the coordinate systems are actually all the same. However, on this side here, it says offset world down here. This is a very useful feature because by having this, it will allow us to move things in a very precise manner. Like for example, we know that in the plan view here, if I were to right click to activate the viewport here, in the plan view or the top view, you'll find that the x-axis is highlighted here in yellow, and it's actually referring to the box here. So if I were to key in a number, or if I were to just toggle the slider, I will be able to move it along the x-axis. Now if I want to move it precisely, I would key in, let's say, 1000 units, enter, and I will be able to move this group of objects very precisely at 1000 units this way. And I can obviously move it backwards by keying in the minus 1000 units backwards as well.